Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tech and Real Estate channel. I'm your co-host, Ariel Herrera and data scientist alongside.
Hey everybody, this is Jose Rivas, senior engineer at Real Estate BI and co-host of this podcast.
Yeah, we're super excited today because we're going to be discussing one of the main topics people ask about is where to invest and how do you decide based on data. Before we get into that, Jose, what have you been up to? How has your week been?
It's been great. It's been great. We're doing a lot of great things over at Real Estate BI. We've got new data coming in, a couple of new features that we've released. One of them is our saved searches feature, and it's a way for customers to be able to take a look at a search criteria in our data and get notifications on um, any new properties that meet that search criteria. And so they're able to monitor kind of a portfolio of properties or build a portfolio of properties using safe searches and get notifications, daily notifications on what's changed. So we're pretty excited about it. What about you? What have you been doing?
Well, yeah, first off, that's super exciting. So basically, you can have your buy box and track how that changes over time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I could see that being really useful for people needing a pulse on the market, property managers as well, since they need to see how the market is shifting. So super
Mhm.
excited. Hopefully, I'll be utilizing the Save Search feature too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited for you guys to try it out. But yeah.
Yeah. And then for myself, I'm working on a ton of different things. One of them being deciding where to invest and really trying to build out our neighborhood heat maps to be as accurate as possible to help grade neighborhoods between A to D, which we could jump into. But first, maybe we could just lightly touch upon why is choosing a market so important in real estate. So, Jose, from your perspective, what are some things that you think are really important when it comes to deciding a market, whether you're looking to invest in or even just simply live in?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is going to have to do with location and what's going on around the neighborhood that the property is in. Right. So a lot of the times, we not only look at the what the property looks like, structure wise or features and all that, but also what's going on around it. So what other properties are being sold and how many properties are being built around there. Um, what does it look like to live in that neighborhood? How much growth there is as far as things to do around there. Kind of what the neighborhood looks like as far as crime rates and demographics. So putting all those parameters together and finding the perfect area to invest in is super important. It's not just finding the property itself, but also the surroundings.
Definitely, because if you purchase an area that doesn't line up with your goals or your strategy, you could really see yourself in not the best position. Being in an area that's
Absolutely.
potentially like high crime, you're not having high occupancy of your tenants, and you're constantly changing over, losing out on cash flow. So it really is important to nail that location early on.
Yeah, exactly. And you really want to look at, neighborhoods that are on the open up, right? Because the goal is to increase in value and, in your investments. So you really want to look at neighborhoods that are on that upward trend.
Yeah, that's always my goal. So growing up in New Jersey, New York City being the main hub, the question was like, if not New York, where are you living? And one of
Right.
the cities that became like really prominent over the last 20, 30 years is Hoboken, New Jersey, and Jersey City, New
Mhm.
Jersey. These were areas that in the 80s, high crime, not many people living in them. And then as I started to go to college and everything, everyone was venturing to these areas because so
Yeah.
many of these young professionals can't afford to live in Manhattan, so they're going outskirts to these other towns, which inherently brings up the property value and you see the whole area transform. So my goal was always like, how do I find the next Hoboken with data?
Yeah,
And I,
absolutely.
yeah, you had some really great points with looking at growth. One piece of growth is population growth. So if you
Hmm.
start to see a lot of people move into an area
Moving
versus
in.
leaving,
Yeah.
that's definitely one. And then crime itself, I'm actually not the biggest fan of crime data. And reason is
How come?
Yeah, the reason not the biggest fan is it's typically like outdated from what I've seen with
Yeah,
crime, at least the free resources, but also it doesn't actually tell me like what is happening. So say if an assault happens on the corner of John Street and Kevin Street. Does that mean I shouldn't buy in the area? Does that mean like people are running away from the area? Like, what is the significance? And it's not
right.
actually saying the effect, it's just saying an event that happened. But the effect, if there's a lot of crime, we would expect population decline. People are like scared to live there, they're moving out. The people who can afford to move out usually have higher incomes. So income starts to decrease. As well, those people with high incomes usually have higher paying jobs. So we see education start to decline. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes not just isolating crime by itself, but looking at all the factors that can be a ripple effect from crime, really help to see like, is an area really being affected by this, or are these just isolated instances or ones that may have some bias towards them?
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, that'll really inform your the what you see in the data as to whether it's significant or not. One of the challenges that we see, and crime is a data set um, that we've been working on for Real Estate API, and we don't have it quite yet. But the challenge is that the in the country there's not like a standard way of reporting crime,
Yes.
right? And so we're left with just kind of hunting down from different agencies, and nobody really has everything up to date. There's some counties that are really good at reporting. There's some counties that are not. Um, and then in cases you have to go like straight to the city itself and not the counties. So
Oh,
it's really challenging to take a look at that data that's not necessarily standardized. And then because it's not standardized, the significance is also in question, to your point.
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that sometimes you would have to gather the data by city, which makes sense because these police departments can go by city.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Which, yeah, definitely makes it more challenging because there's about 3,000 counties, but cities,
Exactly. And then cities, it just gets crazy. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think some great resources, and I see that you guys have it on Real Estate API too, is the census data to be able to gather some of this economic data. Um, which, for those that may not be familiar, the census data is collected by the US government, and they have different types of surveys. There's one that's done every decade, 2010, 2020, where you'll see mostly all of the population of the US being surveyed. So you get a lot more data. Um, but however, there is one that's done every single year, which takes a smaller population of the US entirety, but does a pretty good job at being able to reflect the whole. So whenever you're looking at this data of US Census, just keep in the back of your mind, are you looking at 2020 or are you looking at the yearly, which is 2022, which I think that's fine to use, but just make sure you understand that distinction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. And when it comes to finding up and coming areas, it can be a bit of a challenge because data gets you pretty far. But then, like you mentioned, Jose, there's amenities. Like people
Yeah.
want to be in areas that there are things to do. And for myself, I've usually seen that these areas that are up and coming, new breweries open, new yoga studios, like these independent businesses that also are a good tell that more people are moving to this area. What are some other amenities that you see could be useful for up and coming neighborhoods?
I see drive time as, something that people find really desirable. Like, am I able to walk around this neighborhood, right? Am I able to get places without necessarily driving out, 15, 20 minutes away? I think that's a big one. The school availability is good to look at. Um, and as far as like amenities, like you said, just having like restaurants and kind of coffee shops, nightlife, local businesses, like all of that is super important.
Yeah, drive time is huge. And that was one of the big things I just kept looking at when I was going from New Jersey to Florida.
Yeah.
Is it needs to be driving distance to, I should need to be able to get into the main city, Tampa, within 20 minutes. And there were some neighborhoods where they were so close together, but yet the disparity could be like 10 minutes, where one property would get you 20 minutes into the city, another one would be 30 minutes, just how like it was constructed.
Just how traffic works. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's definitely a great point that you hit on. And some others too, like if you wanted to go luxury route, be, even if you can't afford to buy in these luxury A neighborhoods that may have a Whole Foods and Equinox, if those businesses do pop up, though, you can try to see the distance of like towns or neighborhoods near it to see what the possibility of like those areas rising.
yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that, that I find in neighborhoods that are up and coming is that you start seeing more kind of public works, right? So there'll be kind of park developments or like walking trails,
Yeah.
kind of like sporting facilities that are, just public. Um, that's usually a good indicator that it's an up and coming neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Distance to parks. Going back to that same original thing that you said, just people want to be able to live somewhere that they have things to do, and feel
Right.
comfortable and safe.
Yeah. Yeah, and the drive, the drive time, it's a lot more, I think, these days on, driving to things to do, with everybody working remotely so much. I think um like drive time commuting to employment was important. I'm not sure that it's as important now as it used to be.
Yeah. So when it comes to like the rankings, they could almost be like amenities first of driving distance, then jobs,
Mhm.
but traditionally was always flipped. But
Yeah, right.
remote work, it kind of changed. And also, I want to get your perspective on this, Jose. So
Sure.
with schools is always one of those top factors to also review, just because if you want to live in a desirable area or rent out in an area that people want to send their kids to school, you want to have some sort of good school system around. But with things going remote, one of my questions is if, like, do you think there's a possibility we'll see areas that have 1 or 2 stars out of 10 for schools where, like, the parents instead send them online to a school that's, like, top rated?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be possible. We've got a I don't know if it's national actually. I'm not like super familiar with there's like an online only school
Oh,
available here in Oklahoma. But I mean it's really different. I'm not, I don't know how it works for like grade school children versus like a college student, for example. Um, so, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the remote has made it to that level. Um, because I think people are still valuing like, okay, there's actual brick and mortar schools that are ranked, at a good level in the neighborhood that I'm looking at.
yeah, definitely. I I heard a lot of pain points from parents during, like, when everyone had to be
But
remote.
yeah, right,
Like,
right.
how do you tell a 7-year-old to sit in a chair for like 8 hours straight?
Exactly, for 8 hours. Right. Yeah.
Like,
I think it becomes kind of a burden for especially for when you have both working parents to
yeah,
facilitate remote learning.
that's a great point as well. Yeah, because it almost becomes like being able to bring them to a school system is like babysitting.
Yeah.
Two,
Right.
two for
Right.
one. Um, yeah, so we talked a little bit about the data that you could look at when looking at up and coming areas, desirable places to invest in. Now, in terms of tooling, one of my favorites is using Gemini to actually do a
Mhm.
quick report on a city. Because even though we can get census data, we can get school systems, all these things, some of the best information comes from news articles. And I'm not going to read like 10 pages of news articles for a city that I'm just even considering. So what I'll type into Gemini is, hey, Gemini, what are the fastest growing jobs, development projects, and the makeup of the city for Oklahoma City? And it does a pretty good job at spitting out some information. Have you ever checked out using either Gemini or ChatGPT for that?
Yeah, I've used ChatGPT. I haven't used Gemini a ton, but yeah, I mean that's a great way to kind of get a summary of an area, and get kind of some facts about it without you having to look around everywhere. Um, but yeah, I'll have to try out Gemini and kind of compare.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at this stage, I'd love to show you a little bit of the work that I've done in terms of how do we actually create these maps that
Yeah,
showcase up and coming areas. Cool. So I'll share my screen here.
awesome. I'm excited to see this.
Great. So just to preface how this all came about, I was at a conference, the ORAC conference, which is one rental at a time, big real estate community in February. And there's a lot of great conversations, but the number one thing I kept hearing was, how do I decide where to invest? How do I decide if I should pull out of a market? Where should I be investing based on my strategy? So from there, we decided to see like, how do we solve this problem for investors? One of the number one things I kept reading on research is there is a concept for investors called neighborhood grades. Just like school system, A being the best or the one that's most desirable, that usually has
Mhm.
luxury finishes like quartz countertops, low crime, and really good school systems. Then on the D side is usually areas that need more revitalization, may have been neglected older homes. So depending on the investor strategy, you may want to go towards that or stay far away from those.
Sure.
So in order to start to define these areas, and right now we're looking at Tampa, Florida, which
Okay.
is on the right-hand side, we see the map. On the left-hand side is properties, but we'll just focus on the right-hand side. So Tampa, for those that aren't aware, sits in Florida on the left-hand side. And contrary to what people believe, it's actually not on the beach. That's St. Pete. So it sits right beforehand by a bay, which is why it's called Tampa Bay. And here we see different colors. So we've defined the neighborhood grades from A, B plus B, all the way down to D. My sweet spot is C plus and B minus areas that have the potential to become a B, B plus.
Right.
And what we initially did is that we had these gentrification heat maps to show you the fastest growing areas, but that actually wasn't what our investors were asking for. They said, it's great to know what's up and coming, but I need to know right now if I buy a property, like what is the state of that area? Because I may never have boots on the ground there. So then we needed to make a map that was flexible, where it gave the real-time view, but also signals future growth. So if I zoom in here, I'm going to select an area, which is about 5 minute, 10-minute drive to downtown. And what we see here when we click it is this pop-up that has information about the area. So for economic data, actually taking a step back, these neighborhoods are what we call census tracts. So a lot of the times I hear people say, what city or state should I invest in? I'm like, no, that's a good to like
Yeah.
start off with, but like
Yeah.
you need to
Right.
know the streets or like the in-depth of where you want to invest, because if you don't, you could be in a pitfall of being in the worst part of the city.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much difference between even areas that are right next to each other. I mean, you guys can see it on the map that's on screen right now. There's tracts that are rated way lower right next to tracts that that are in that AB range.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
you really gotta have an in-depth knowledge of the city.
exactly. So the aim is to have like that in-depth knowledge without having boots on the ground to at least get you
Hmm.
85% of the way there with data. And then of course, have an agent or a trusted individual on the ground afterwards. But this part that's actually more of a D area that I'm highlighting, I actually was skeptical and I was like, I'm not sure if this data is like completely correct. So I actually drove past
Yeah.
it and it validated the map. But
Okay.
so now I'm selecting another area up here, which is called Riverside Heights in Tampa. Has a population of about 3,000. It's about 10 blocks long, 5 blocks wide. And we could see for this area the economic stats that come from the US Census. So median household income, employment, vacancy, et cetera. Everything is beating state averages. So it's always important to have some sort of benchmark. Because
Hmm.
for cities like Detroit, I was seeing like, oh wow, this area is like doing really well. And when you put in the context of like all of
Of the
Michigan,
state. Yeah. Right.
not so
Yeah.
great. So even though this is beating state averages, nothing is like jumping off the charts like, oh, people are making like so much money. It's all pretty much in line, which is why there's two other factors, Jose. So alongside economic data, we are also looking at market data and amenities to get the real-time view. So
Gotcha.
since this data is about 2 years outdated, we then supplement it with market data. So we look to see all current listings right now, and as well as what's sold in the last 6 months. So we could see for this particular area that there's 16 listings with the median being $1.6 million. Now, Jose, for someone that makes 80 or a household that makes 84K a year, do you think they can afford a $1.6 million home?
That's a pretty steep price for that income. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they came into some money and they could afford it, but usually you cannot.
Yeah.
So what this is telling us is there's some like, $1 million homes being built here. It doesn't really support the economic data that we're seeing. So what is happening? So by going into those properties that have been selling as well as currently listed, we could start to get the makeup of what those properties are. And we could see here that the median construction year is 2021, which luckily, me being a local, I know that this area has a lot of 1940s bungalows, and they're just being torn down to put $1 million homes instead, because they've
Hmm.
done a lot of redevelopment to the waterfront and has great locality to downtown Tampa,
That makes sense.
which is why here we reflect that with this tag of recent new build growth. So initially, our grade here may have been like a B minus, or just a regular B. But by kind of seeing this together, you could start to picture like this is a B neighborhood right now, but it's likely turning into a B plus based on this growth and based on the disparity of price.
Right. And I'm assuming that the economics will follow that build trend, right? Like you said, the economics data is from the census, so it's going to be a little bit older than the rest of the data. But that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's a bit lagged, but definitely we'll see that economic data come through as well. And then this area, which we see in purple, what's really interesting is that we could see this like gradient where it goes from B to B minus to then C and like C minus D area.
Hmm.
So for those investors, or first I'll start off with myself. So I like to look at C plus that has the potential to become a B plus. Some investors may want to take even more risk and say like, I'm going to hold this property for 30 years. I'm okay with buying it in an area that may have a lot less desirability, as long as I could see growth. So by seeing like this pattern, we could see that there seems to be some sort of revitalization, or at least like strong sense of wanting to live here with being a B area. And it's starting to shift to the right hand side. So if I was brand new coming into this market, I'd probably want to learn a little bit more about what's happening in Ybor City and Jackson Heights, these towns that are coming through here.
Right.
Which, if we actually look up Ybor City, which I'll show you a quick view. Um, Ybor City is an area in Tampa that has a lot of places to go like shopping, eat. Used to be a whole cigar area. Then it came
Okay.
to a point where a lot of crime was in the area and less people started to visit it. Homes were a lot older and not getting repaired. But now there's this whole push of actually redeveloping this entire area. So by looking at news articles and kind of pairing it, you could start to see like, oh, based on the path of progression, I might want to take that risk and invest in a C minus area, maybe be a little bit spotty with cash flow for the first couple of years, but there could be some really big growth if I hold on to it for, say, a 5, 10, or 20-year timeline.
Yeah, and you have some tracts right next to it, right next to those areas that are a higher grade. So I would hope that, it kind of starts spreading out to the right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be like the assumed hope, and then pairing that with news articles or other types of maybe qualitative data helps as well.
Hmm.
So that's a Tampa market. And then I do want to show you one where we have some emerging markets too. I
Okay.
think there should be in Dallas or in Houston. So let me pull up both.
This is a really cool feature that you guys did. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, while this is pulling up, the best part was that it was kind of like me diving into research papers, trying to bridge it together with data, but a large factor of it was just getting
Yeah.
feedback from other investors, other agents, because I can only validate so much. If I've never stepped foot in Houston, I won't know if the data is like correct or not.
Yeah.
So that was really useful. So I'm going to share my screen here for Houston, which is a lot wider of a market. And in this case, we can kind of start to see a trend where on the left-hand side of Houston, it's more A grade, B plus.
Yeah.
Towards the right-hand side, we start to get more to that C minus D area. And then there's some fluctuation between north and south. But what we try to do as well is that if we start to see areas that have growth, we label them as emerging areas. So these are areas that are surrounded by C minus D
Lower.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're starting to see recent build growth. So this one, for example, median household income is about 40K, which is almost half of the state average. But we start to see again, like the median construction years going up, most homes being built in 2015, as well as we could see like median list price is relatively like
259.
pretty high in relation to the median household income. Um, so by flagging these, the hope is that, and for some investors, they've already validated that this has helped them to see what areas could be up and coming within a given city.
Right. And so the grading on the map, is that current, and you're just tagging that as it may go up in grading, or is the emerging flag um, raising that score?
Yeah, so the score itself is actually a B.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, based upon more so of the market data that we're seeing in relation to other areas. So that is one good thing to note is instead of just isolating each neighborhood and saying, okay, what's the score for this neighborhood? Now the next one, now the next one. We look at all the neighborhoods for a city, look at distances across each of these neighborhoods, and then trying to form with our algorithm what the grade is, not just isolated, but looking at the entire city as a whole.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good approach.
Thank you. But how that all pairs together is we then have the properties on the left-hand side, which we use real estate APIs, our main data source. We have other AI algorithms that help us calculate the condition of a property to see if it's a fixer-upper or if it's something that's ready to go, turnkey. And then we apply relevant return on investment metrics. So in this case, you're seeing cash flow, and you can actually see cash flow across the entire map. So
Hmm.
say if I was interested in this area, I'm just going to click out of this link here. There is one property here, 5.2% for cash flow. We can open it up here. And this gives us just an overview of the property itself. We could see it was recently remodeled, 3-bed, 1-bath, positive cash on cash return. We could look at different rent values as well as going towards comps to review this. And what's really neat, which I won't dive into here, but if you were to review the comps, all the comps are on the map. Because one of the biggest things
Oh, that's cool.
one of the biggest feedback points we had is, hey, if I'm looking at comps and one comp is on the wrong side of the highway and the other comp is on the right side, those are two completely different comps. One I want to completely exclude from my algorithm. So this basically gives the ability to do so by having that map overlay.
Yeah, that's really smart because it really can skew the whole thing, if one of those is on, like I said, on the wrong side of the highway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with that, it's just so interesting how real estate is so local. You're clearly seeing a lot of that too with the crime data. Um,
Hmm.
retrieving everything. It's not just, hey, let me download a button of things in the US. It really does take a lot to aggregate all this information, but by doing so, it can help make more informed decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that familiarity that you still need to have how it all works together. But it makes it super interesting.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you so much, listeners, as well as Jose, for discussing a little bit more about the markets. And if you have any questions below on how to decide on a market, what data sources to use, any free tooling, please let us know in the comments and we'll get back to you.
Thank you, everybody.